Hello and welcome to our official first episode. The last episode that we had just played was an intro to what Chesed marriage podcast was going to be about. So tonight we are going to share our first topic.
Tonight we're going to start with communication. We're going to get into obviously some heavier topics later on. But to be able to resolve any topic, you got to be able to effectively communicate and talk back and forth between you and your spouse. So what we were going to start with tonight was just working through communications, challenges, some funny stories. We got some funny stories on this from our past, and then talk about some other aspects of it. So to kick it off, start with basics in basics in communication. I heard a funny story once that when you talk, you think you just say something and someone hears it. But when in reality, when you say something, there's what you said, what you thought you said, what you meant to say, what they heard, what they interpreted, and then what they actually believed. And so it talks about all the different ways that a message can break down in communication. And if you've ever played the telephone game at a party or with your friends or growing up, you definitely understand how something starts with a message definitely can end up something different at the end. One of the little stories I'd say on this is when we were dating, or right when we were engaged, or before we got married, I was talking to my bride and we were talking about finances. And my wife said, I never want to have to worry about money. So what I heard was...
what I said. I literally said, I never want to worry about money.
So what I heard was, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure we never have to worry about money. And lovely dear, what did you mean?
What I meant was, I want to be able to go spend money on whatever I want without having to worry about not having enough money.
She wanted to be able to spend whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, on whatever she wanted.
What was the first birthday that we actually spent together as husband and wife? What did I tell you that I wanted?
Wasn't it like $1,000 and no questions asked, yes. Or a couple thousand, which yes. I thought was hilarious because not even 6 months later at Christmas, we hadn't said anything. And we're sitting there and Megan's mom told her dad that she thinks the coolest thing was if she got a few $1,000s with no questions asked. And I was like, man.
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When I said I didn't want to worry about money, what I was saying was I always want there to be enough. I never want to have to worry that there's not going to be enough. And if I want to go spend money, I don't want to have to justify. Of course, then, I do have to say I was completely ignorant when it came to finances. I had no clue, nor did I really care to learn about finances or how to take care of finances at the time. So much so that we went to the Dave Ramsey class that they offered at our church with Tommy Gaines. And that man has so much patience because this ignorant, very naive, very childish adult didn't want to learn about how to manage money because it was something that I didn't have to worry about. And when I say I didn't have to worry about growing up, what I mean is I was not taught the responsibility of finances because my dad was very good at managing money. And so that was something that I never had to worry about. I never wanted for anything growing up. So whenever we talked about in communicating, at the very beginning of our marriage, when I said that, what I was saying is, I want you to spoil me like my dad did. Like, I don't want to have to, and when I say spoil, what I meant was, I want to be treated like a princess, basically. When I want something, I don't want to have to think about it. Now, of course, when my dad hears this, he's going to say, that's not what I did.
But that's how you interpret it.
That's how I interpret it.
As a parent, though, that means you did some stuff right?
Oh, yeah. I never...
Because you don't want your kids you don't want them to worry about living.
Right.
Right? But...
Which my parents did so well. My parents, right. They did an incredible job of, like, raising me and Cody to be just incredibly blessed. And I do believe that it was my dad and my mom choosing the principle, the very first principle, and we'll get into finances, but the very first principle that my parents taught us that I did see very faithful was tithing. My parents were very, very faithful tithers. And I know that my dad was an excellent employee, and that is something that he taught. So stewardship. My dad was an incredible steward of finances, and I do believe that the Lord honored that and blessed that. And so we had a very, very blessed life. But going into a marriage and communicating, what that meant to me was
It meant, Michael, go make enough money. I can do what I want.
Yeah, Michael, go be a second David. Go do what he did.
And it took me a while to actually filter through, because I would caught myself getting frustrated and mad when I would try to talk to her about budgeting. And this isn't about finances. We're just using this as an example.
The point of it is to understand communication. So I said one thing and what he heard was not what I meant. And
it took us months, if not years, to be able to realize that from that conversation, I had made assumptions that she meant one thing when she meant something completely different. Mm-hmm. Then when we realized that, we had to then walk back all these expectations that had been made in the interim.
And just in conversation.
And just re-level set, because when she said one thing, I heard something completely different, and vice versa.
Oh, I hope so badly that we get into something that was a really hard conversation, but it had to do with communication, because what you heard was something very, very bad, and what I said was, I hope that we get there. Maybe. Maybe.
So, the next point that we wanted to really talk about was the different types of communication. Mm-hmm. In a marriage, there is an aspect that's not, roses are red, violets are blue, I love you, let's do the dishes, right? Like, there's a type of communication that's facts. Like, there's things that have to be communicated. We joke and call it like the business of running the house. That sometimes there's communication that's not emotional, it's not glamorous, it's not sexy, it's just kind of, who's picking up the kids, who's doing this, we need to pay this bill, are you paying it, am I paying it, like who's going to, did we take care of this, did we take care of that, we got an appointment, there's factual information. Then there's also personal information, or personal communication, which is like, hey, I had a really rough day. Those few words in your mind, if your spouse tells you that, should trigger an automatic response, like almost not, this is going to sound really harsh, but almost like triage. Like, that's them throwing up a flag saying, I need you to dig in, even if I don't act like I want you to, I need you to dig into what's going on in my mind. Whenever a spouse starts a conversation, or I'm having a really bad day, or I'm having a really rough time, or I'm really struggling, that should almost be a stopgap for you. Because the only thing that comes before your spouse is your relationship with God. So almost regardless of what else it is, you may need to put it on the back burner. Realistically, I mean, if you're driving, you can't just, stop the car in the middle of the freeway.
You mean we can't pray? Like, close your eyes and
so
pray?
That's another communication story. She was driving to drop me off when I was coaching Upward, and we stopped to get breakfast tacos, and my wife, bless her, was like, you have to pray before you touch a bite of food, in which I understand. Because
bless the food.
It's pre-blessed food.
And
right?
why was I driving?
Because you wanted to drop me off, because you wanted to come back, and I think you were going shopping. Anyways, you were coming back from my game later when I coached, because I had a ref before I coached.
This was before we had kids.
Right. So we're driving to the gym, and we just picked up some tacos, and I hear her having this real eloquent prayer, and she gets like 5 words in, and I just hear the Holy Spirit say, open your eyes. And I open my eyes, and I look at her. My wife's driving down the road at 50 miles an hour with her eyes closed. And I was like, babe, open your eyes. She goes, I can't open my eyes when I pray. And I was like,
communicating.
It's okay. You open your eyes. I don't want to die and meet Jesus right now. Open your eyes. We'll be talking to him face to face if you don't.
Man.
And we were on a 2-lane road. And so I was like, yeah, simmer that down.
Okay,
but
go back to personal.
Personal communication is like, like yesterday, for example. She sent me a message and she said, hey, yesterday was a really rough day. I had to make some rough calls and some rough decisions. I just want to hang out and have a low-key night, which is a big deal for my wife. She doesn't really do anything low-key. And so...
No.
So her saying that meant to me, all right, Dishes need to be done before we go to bed. Kitchen needs to be cleaned up. House needs to be as reset as possible automatically, because anything else, she's already at a level 9 stress-wise inside if she's saying that.
So I do want to point out, especially people that are just starting the marriage journey, or you've been in it like 5, 10, 15 years, 20, 30, 50. You have to understand that marriage is about serving. It's really about servanthood. And one of the things that I learned early on was that he can't read my mind as much as I want him to read my mind.
And I'm pretty good at it.
That's part of communicating. Like, you have to, if there's something, and you know what, it is, for me, it is a control issue, and I do believe that the Lord is working that out of me. I have a Martha spirit, is what I call. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I can relate so much to Martha, because I get really uptight when things are out of my control and I want them to look and feel a certain way. And early on, that was one of the things that I shared with him, was because he wanted to know. He wanted to know, how can I keep the heart of the home in a place where she's at peace? Because truly, I mean, the way that God designed marriage, we are designed so differently. I mean, you know, the father is the head and the wisdom of the home, and the mom or the mother is the heart of the home. It's the heart of the father, and it keeps the peace in the home. And I mean, the fact that I had so much, that I still struggle with it, with just controlling the situation. But one of the things that I appreciated in Michael early on in our marriage was that one way that we effectively communicated was, these are the things that will really help me to not get so wound up. And it's something that you're willing to serve me in, that, you know, you will take up, you know, certain chores around the house. This was before kids, I mean, and even after kids. But that's something, like, ladies, it's okay to share those things that are like, well, he should know that. Well, no, they don't. Most of the time they don't. And it's okay to share those things that are like, it really bothers me when you don't take 2 extra seconds to put your dirty clothes in the dirty hamper and you just leave them on the floor. Like, that is something that really sets me off. Something as dumb as that. Or it really, another way that I had to tell him, you know, was the way that he talked to me. A lot of times early on in our marriage, I always felt like I was this big, not because of what he was saying, but because of how he was saying it. And all he was doing was just communicating. He was just talking.
It was my work voice. Because I was used to, at work, having to lead a bunch of people and tell them what we had to do, when we had to do it, and usually we didn't have a lot of time. And so I was used to having a very authoritative and assertive tone, which is ironic, because now I've almost gone so far the other way that I talk so quiet, and I trained myself to adjust the way I talked, because she saw it as me being... She knew my character, and that's what I'll get to in a little bit. But she knew I didn't mean it that way, but the way it came off to her, remember, it wasn't what I intended, but it's what she heard and what she felt and what she interpreted, was that it was demeaning and belittling, which then shut down everything, because it's like triggers a fight or flight response, right? Yeah. And so knowing your tone, knowing how it's being received, knowing what their, if you want to call it a trigger, what their little set points are, the little landmines are, right? That when you know those, you help. It's not your job to change anything about your spouse, but when you know they're in an extraordinary situation because of external stressors, and everybody knows there's a lot right now in the world, do whatever you can to help limit those. For the sheer fact of
keeping peace.
Will you keep peace in the house? But the longer term goal, and this is what the Lord's been revealing to me a lot recently, and I don't even know if I've shared this with you yet, is that mimic the type of person you want your kids to marry. So I got 3 girls and a boy. I want my son to learn how to pursue his future wife the way that I pursue Megan. So I'm going to pursue Megan the way I want him to pursue his wife. And I'm going to pursue her to set the standard for what my daughters are going to require any man to come in their life. Yeah. And you heard that from my wife. That wasn't even scripted. What did she say earlier? Michael, I wanted you to be like a little David. She caught that. He never said, Megan, you need to find a little me. And he's going to cringe when he sees that. But she caught that from her home. And I need to mimic that, because I can talk till I'm blue in the face to my girls about what type of person they need to marry or be with, but I'm just dad, so I'll end up like the Peanuts cock.
Okay, so let's go really quick. And this is not something that we came up with on our own. This is coming from, pastors like Jimmy Evans and the XO Marriage, and then Dave and Ashley Willis. This is not Megan and Michael coined, but one of the first needs of a woman is security.
Yeah.
And so where they feel secure, even if you've had a bad childhood, if you had a terrible father, when I say terrible, if you had a father that was so broken because of his past issues that he didn't know how to treat you, where did you feel the most secure? Those are the attributes that you're going to be looking for in a spouse. And what the enemy will do, and we'll get into this later, what the enemy will try to do is he will twist those into thinking that it could be found in the same sex, or that it could be found, he could twist it so that you would believe you deserve less than that. And then you would go seek out those kinds of broken people. And like I said, that's another topic. But the point of it is communication is so important. And it's very, very important to understand where your spouse is coming from and what they're actually saying. That takes intimacy. Of course, everybody thinks when I say the word intimacy, they immediately think it's sex.
No.
Sex is a fourth of what intimacy means.
And it's usually the very last fourth.
The very, very last. It's the physical, the physical
manifestation of all the other
of intimacy it's very, very little. And again, that's not Megan and Michael original content. That is just what we've learned and what we've experienced through other marriage courses or marriage
conferences
content.
and
conferences.
material. But the other part of intimacy and all of this as well, just like she's saying, there's a part of personal, right? Like I'm having a bad day, I'm having this, I'm having that. But there's another part of intimacy that's like, hey, I'm really anxious about this, or I'm scared about this.
Oh, why don't you?
Or it could be for a man, it could be, hey, I need some intimate time, like I'm catching my mind drifting away. And being able to be open, even if you're in a tiff at the moment, and you can never abuse it. Yeah. But being able to say that, because that helps protect the marriage, honestly. And I'm not saying that because I'm a man and most men have a higher sex drive. But you want their husbands want their tank empty and their wives need their tank full.
Yeah. Explain that concept, please.
The concept is if you are keeping with the wife's needs, and we can do a session on that and I'll write them out to make sure I don't butcher them. I don't think I can recite them all from memory, but I do know security is their top need. If they don't feel secure and they don't feel like you're pursuing them essentially and engaging with them at all levels, physical, non-sexual, physically, emotional, spiritually, they don't feel protected. They don't feel able to open up to the actual inner parts of what they were. The way I learned this is pretty recently in our marriage, we were talking and we were working through some stuff, and we were talking with Siri. And
not the phone. Siri Muscarella is our pastor.
We were talking with our pastor, and he looked at us and he was helping us walk through processing really communication issues. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, Michael, what's Megan's dreams? And I said, I don't know. She's never told me any. And he said, you have an intimacy problem. Mm-hmm. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, if your wife isn't, she goes, every person has a dream or has a strong desire. They may not say, like, I have a dream, but they have a desire in their heart. And if they're not willing to share that with you, he goes, I call that the holy of holies inside of them, the resonance in them. If they haven't shared with you what that true dream is, you have an intimacy problem where they don't trust you to that level yet. And there's something, he goes, you need to go work on that like you do when you're running your plant. And you need to study your wife like you study the plant.
That was like year 3, because and we will talk about it later on. But
and that's beside this, what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. But the point was that the auxiliary stuff pointed to a deeper issue that then I had to go work on. And I can't just go to Megan, hey, tell me your dream. Oh, I want to go sing at Broadway. Well, check. I checked that box. Yeah, now we got intimacy back. No, that's not how it works, right? But it's about getting those checks and understanding, are they really there? What's that? When you have that date night, not every date night, right? The skies don't open up and birds don't carry down a cup of coffee, and
What did Jimmy Evans say? On those nights, you need to get a trophy.
Get a trophy, give each other a high five and touch the trophy, because it's going to only be like 1 in 100.
And also, don't use this as a checklist against your spouse. Okay, ladies, if your husband is doing all the things right, don't use it as a checklist. Remember, marriage is a servanthood. Like that's kind of our catchphrase. For Chesed, it is the benefit and the benevolence of the other person. Your main goal is to serve in a way that goes beyond yourself. And it's like, but he's a jerk. My husband's a jerk. He doesn't do any of those things for me. Why would I go above and beyond?
Well, if you treat him like a jerk, he's going to keep being a jerk. Because the way that you treat your spouse, male or husband, is the one that they respond to. Husband or female, your wife or your husband, however you treat them. And I struggled for years. It was like, year 5 or 6, where I finally verbally said, if I don't look out for me, who will? Because Megan won't. It was somewhere in there.
And the Lord broke. Year 3, year 7,
let me finish that point though. Then the Lord broke that, and He said, well, are you looking for Megan to complete this in you, or are you looking for me? Because your job isn't to get that completion from Megan. Your job is to get that from me. Your job is to help complete that in Megan to a certain degree as Christ loved the church. But Megan, there's things that you are never going to be able to fulfill for Megan, so don't try to. That's what I have to fulfill. He goes, you try to help unleash the best version of Megan that's possible. And in doing that, it changed my perspective when we were talking, because it changed it from what can I get out of this to how can I serve my wife.
And that's why whenever we started the podcast, for those of you that are, new in your faith or new in your walk, what he's saying is, and I mentioned this in our very first episode, is that a marriage is 3. It's 3 people. It's the husband, it's the wife, and it's the Lord. You cannot function in a marriage without him. And so something that we learned early on is that marriage is 100% effective and workable.
Has 100% success rate.
It's 100% success rate if you do it God's way. What does that mean? There are certain boundaries, and we're going to talk about when those boundaries are broken before marriage and then in marriage. There are certain boundaries that the Lord constituted when He created the union of marriage, and when those go outside of the boundaries, or when those boundaries are broken, that's where the enemy or where just life, the brokenness of being in a world that's just, it's full of sin, that's where that begins to disintegrate the covenant that God established in marriage. So again, for those of you that are new in your faith or new in the walk, we call it the walk, which means just in your Christian belief. Again, this is based off of Judeo-Christian beliefs and standards that were coming from the Bible. Marriage is 100%, has a 100% success rate if you do it in the confines and the boundaries of what God's ordained. And one of those is obedience. Well, how do you learn obedience? Like, God doesn't speak to me orally. Well, no, He speaks to you through wise counsel. Reading the Word, prayer. All of these are disciplines that come with the maturity. It's not just going to church. A Christian walk is not just going to church and going to a Bible study. Those are good things, but that doesn't constitute a walk.
It's ultimately a relationship with Him. So we're getting to the last section, and the last section that I want to cover is situational. And so you need to understand the basics of communication, the types of communication, and then the situation in which the communication is happening. And so when I say situational, this sounds redundant, but informational communication, again, you got to understand it can be more blunt, could be more abrupt.
Yeah.
Right? Could be kind of shorter. It's not going to be as fluffy. It could be real, just direct. And so
it's going to be more conversational.
And you understand this because if you put it in that context, it helps to ease the ability, or makes it easier to not get offended if something rubbed you the wrong way, because you got to put it in the totality of the circumstances that it's in. The second type of part is time sensitive, right? There's times Megan called me when she was teaching, like, hey, I forgot this and I need this and I'm starting to teach a class. I love you. Can you bring it by?
It's terrible.
And I can get offended.
Setting him up for failure. At that point, I'm like setting him up for failure.
And I can get offended because I'm like, she didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask what I was feeling or how my meetings were going. You know, she just told me what she needed. Her job's so much more important than mine. I got to drop everything I'm doing to go take care of her because she couldn't remember something in the morning. That's what the enemy starts running with, right? But what really happened there? If I break down that snippet, what happened? And I've done the same to her. Hey, I'm sorry, I missed this. Can you bring it? I have meetings and I'm swamped. I got a 5-minute break between them. Can I meet you over here on the side of the road to pick this up? Can you grab it and bring it to me?
Or rolling out of bed 10 minutes after 7 when your alarm's been going off at 5:30 and I'm running around the house getting all 4 kids out and you're like, hey, I have a meeting, I gotta go. This is real.
She's not bitter about that.
I'm telling you, this is real stuff. So I have a choice, just like he's saying, you have a choice to make. And one of the most beautiful analogies that I've seen recently, and this was we just went to EXO. Again, Jimmy Evans, EXO Marriage today, Dave and Ashley Willis, they got up and they're the Naked Marriage podcast. If you don't know who they are, Google them. They're phenomenal. But their analogy was they had exercise balls, like the big blue gummy ones or whatever. So they represented offenses. And so in communication, when something doesn't go how you expected, okay, in communication, you have the choice of being offended or to let the offense go. So the rubber exercise ball represented an offense. And I don't know if you've ever played with an exercise ball, but they're fun. And holding on to a fence can be fun because you can use it against your spouse. Like, you didn't listen to me this morning, you decided to sleep in, you decided, and it's all, you're pointing the blame on you. What could I have done to change the situation? Right? The whole point of it is they used it as an analogy to show you have the choice of releasing your offense, to just let it go. And when I say let it go, it's like we wear it as a badge. And I think offenses can be very, very harsh over time. And it's like, well, they just keep doing it over and over and over again. And it's like, yeah, how many times do you think we've done that to Jesus? And yet there he is at the end looking right at us saying, I gave everything for you because I loved you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of understanding what marriage is this side of heaven, is that we're broken. Okay, you have 2 broken people trying to walk out this faith and trying to walk out this walk. Offenses will come, offenses will go. Heartaches, unmet expectations are going to come and go. What you have to understand is that if Michael was worth Jesus's life, who am I to hold that offense against him? I'm basically spitting in Jesus's face and saying, what you did wasn't good enough. And I have this right. To be honest, when you become a believer, you have no rights because you now belong to a different kingdom. And I know I'm using a lot of big Christian words. What I'm saying is, when you become a Christian, you are saying, I am no longer living for myself. I'm living for what the Lord has called me to. I'm living for what the Bible says, and I'm going to do the best that I can to walk this life out with the help of the Holy Spirit and with the help of your a believing spouse, even if your spouse is an unbeliever, and there's that struggle too. The point of it is that you learn to walk out these struggles out of obedience. I have the choice of holding that offense and using it as a weapon against my spouse because our communication failed. Or I have the opportunity to let it go and not allow the enemy to use that as a weep hole to get in between us and put a wedge in between us. Scripture says, where there's jealousy and strife, there's every evil work. Where there's envy and strife, there's every evil work.
Yeah. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is there can be situations where the communication is dire or extremely stressful. A quick light story and then a little bit heavier story. A light story on this is, it didn't seem light at the time, but during Harvey, we had evacuated to Waco, and we got flooded, and everything we ended up keeping was in the car. And we had just found out, we were driving back from an event, we had just found out that basically our house had been flooded. One of our neighbors called us, and when they had left on the last truck out of the neighborhood, and said, hey, it breached the house. It's about, a foot or whatever in the house. And I told him I appreciate it, get out of there and stay safe or whatever. And I'm a verbal processor. I talk through things as I'm processing them, especially when I'm in a very unfamiliar situation. I either talk with one of my really close friends or I talk with my wife about it as I'm working through it.
Call it as brainstorming.
And so as we were driving back from this event, the kids were asleep in the back seat of the car. We didn't know what we were going to do. At that point, they were saying it could be weeks before the water goes down and we can actually get back in the house. We didn't know where we were going to stay. We didn't have any of the answers. And I'm processing this out loud, talking to her as we're driving. And I literally, looking back now, is very dumb, but I had verbally vomited for like
an hour
straight. And we were just driving around that Waco while the kids were asleep because I was just, I process when I drive too. And I remember looking at her and go, but you're not responding. Like, what are you thinking? And man, the nuclear bomb went off. Yeah. I'm glad I was sitting down because I'd be limping if I wasn't sitting down. And I had basically just dumped all this stuff on my wife, who doesn't process that way, and was then just like, so what do you think about that? That kind of stinks, but what do you think? And in her mind, it was just like,
our life sucks. This is going to be really bad. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't have a plan for us to get out of this. So my security net was busted.
And so she reacted accordingly and made sure to tell me about all those things in a very passionate manner.
I was mean.
Not all in English.
No.
And so needless to say, it shut down the communication for the rest of the night and really till the next day.
It was bad. We actually slept in separate rooms. We did find the Lord provided a place for us to stay, which was just, that's another story for another time. But it was truly miraculous how we were able to navigate that and then come back. And then what happened after, it was just, that's when Sophie had her major seizure.
But the point of that was the communication there. I had lacked the ability to understand that this wasn't the time to process like I normally would, because my wife's already at a level 50 on stress, and I can't verbally process with her at that point. And at the same time, she hadn't learned at that point that when I get to that level of stress, I'm going to verbally process.
Well, just bluntly stated, I didn't want to hear it because I didn't know how to handle the situation. And she
just kept saying, I've never had to deal with this, Michael. I don't know. I'm like, I haven't either.
I'd like to say that, at that point in my life, I wish I could tell you I prayed and I sought the Lord and I found peace and solace, because I didn't. I lost my mind. And I think a full-on panic attack, I would say, because I did not fully even trust what the Lord was doing. To be honest, I was angry. I was angry that our house got flooded. I had prayed and asked the Lord to protect our house, that our house would be like an island. And that's not what happened. And I was angry. I was very angry at God, if I'm just being completely transparent. And so I allowed the enemy to take that, and fear completely overloaded my mind and my thoughts. And I did not take those thoughts captive. Looking back now, if I could tell myself again, remember who your provider is. He's not my provider. And because he failed, I immediately was like, everything's gonna fail, because my eyes were on him. My eyes weren't on my provider. My eyes weren't on my rock. He was my rock. And that's another thing about communication, is that your spouse cannot be your foundation. Your spouse cannot be your everything. First of all, we're human. You know, we're gonna fail. And looking back, I would tell myself, Michael's not your foundation. And right now your foundation is being shaken. But had I taken a step back and remembered, the Lord is my rock and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Had I remembered, the Lord is my provider, I know that he has everything that I'll ever need. Had I taken a step back and remembered, perfect love casts out all fear. And in that moment, it's a moment of stress, but that's where...
And I can work all things for the good of those goals.
He can work all things for the good, which he did. Like, I mean, to be able to look back at that moment and see a monument immediately after with the Lord's faithfulness of what he did provide, I can tell you now that was very ignorant of me. And what I'm saying is, and what I'm really hoping that people understand, is that you can get through anything in marriage as long as the Lord is part of that battle. As long as you allow him to be part of that and invite him in, your marriage is 100% successful, no matter how lost or how bad of the situation it is. It is 100% successful if you do it God's way.
And there's another story that was actually more serious that I wanted to talk about tonight. We're going a little long, but that's okay.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Put
it in a nutshell.
When Soph had some of her challenges, a few years back, she got to the point where her seizures were life-threatening and she was stopping breathing and aspirating, and Megan would actually have to revive her. And it happened, at that point, it happened multiple times in a week.
Yeah, and here's the beautiful thing too, is that although those were very scary, really hard moments to walk through, I remember we were actually in this room, and I was folding laundry. Michael was we were watching a movie, I was folding laundry, and just I don't want to say it was out of nowhere, because the Holy Spirit knows. I had just laid Sophie down, and I felt like I needed to go check on her. And I told Michael, I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to go check on Sophie. And he was like, okay, is everything okay? I was like, no, I don't think everything's okay. I mean, we were down here in this room. Sophie's upstairs in her room. I run upstairs, and Sophie was purple. She had stopped breathing. She had started to aspirate on her own. She started to aspirate, and she was purple. She wasn't responding. Her lips were, it was awful. But even in that, the Holy Spirit was faithful, because had I not been listening, had I been frustrated that I'm sitting here doing my laundry, if I was so caught up in the moment of my frustration and stress, I wouldn't have heard the voice of the Lord telling me, you need to go check on Sophie. So I went and checked on her. We called 911, took her to the emergency room. Come to find out that her seizures had been exasperated to the point where they were several weeks of testing and staying in the hospital and just long nights of trying to figure out what we're going to do, which is what Michael's getting to. But just for time's sake, basically they said surgery is your only option. Now, the surgery, she was
having 400 or 500 seizures a day on average.
How do we know that? She had a VNS, so a vagal nerve stimulator, put in when she was 4 years old, and that tracks how many times that
it's on her brainstem.
It's wrapped around her vagus nerve. And it tracks how many times that it has to fire to interrupt any kind of seizure activity. And so what they had calculated using the device was, it was coming up that it was stopping anywhere from 375 to 450 seizures a day.
Yeah.
To the point where she was falling out of her chair. She was getting lost at school.
She'd be walking and forget where she was going because her brain was resetting from the seizure, and she wouldn't know where she was.
She wouldn't know where she was. So the doctor was like, it's either surgery or, there's a possibility that she may not come out of this. And so this...
Well, there was different surgeries too. But what we were getting to is on the communication, there was a time crunch because the frequency between the seizures was getting shorter and shorter. And she was having more and more severe seizures in a shorter period of time. And we had been praying for years and still were praying and believing in the healing and still praying and waiting for that. But we had also been on meds. We had failed almost all the families of meds. She's on cocktails of different meds. But
she had taken like 4 different ones. And
she failed all 5 families.
And so we started a new regimen. So now she's taking 3.
And so the options were pretty aggressive. One was cut out a chunk of her skull and put a stimulator directly in her brain, which is what they were pushing us to. And there was another option to go in and, what is it called, resect, or basically ablate.
Well, she ended up having an ablation.
But pull out, basically cut out and burn out the section where they believe the seizures were coming. And then the third option was to do nothing and keep doing meds and basically just have to stay at the hospital and hope she grows out of it.
But the process of getting to what we ended up choosing was...
Well, we had time since we had to go through because it was getting worse. We were praying about it and neither one of us felt like we had a direct, clear answer on it. But we had an OR. They had the OR scheduled because we knew we had to do something. Because when we prayed about it, we definitively felt like the Lord wasn't saying do nothing. And then we went through the whole struggle. Is this a lack of faith? Is it not? And we were working through that. And we had a couple weeks. And when you have that type of communication, it actually drives another level of intimacy. Because I can remember multiple times at night, we're both exhausted, we're stressed, we're fried, but you're trying to make huge life-altering decisions. And they also told us in either one of these surgeries, there's a chance Soph may not wake back up, she may not be the same, she may have all these other complications.
She may not remember who you are, she can lose her memory, she can actually lose functioning of her arm, her hands or her writing,
right.
Which, yeah.
But the point of the communication side is,
yeah,
the one that really, at least for me, seemed to break the tension and was able to give us a little bit more peace. We sat down one night and I remember saying, babe, I'm not putting this decision on you. Mm-hmm. I'm the head of the house. I will live with whatever happens on this, but it's too big of a decision for me to not have your input. And I want to understand what you're thinking. Because at that point, it was like 24 or 48 hours, like we almost hadn't talked.
Well, and
it wasn't a bad not talk. It wasn't like we were mad. It was like we were both just processing so deep and like in trying to pray and also like we just weren't communicating with each other. And then that opened the floodgates of, well, what are you hearing? What are you thinking?
To be completely honest, what I was hearing was just fear. I was like, I'm going to lose Sophie. And so I bring up another point that Siri actually helped us walk through, which I want to share just really quick. And that is, it doesn't matter what the situation in your life is, if you can see, and this comes with, maturity, this comes with, having a mature walk with the Lord, which at that point I did not, because I was so consumed with fear. But he told me, honey, because I told him, I was like, Siri, I don't know what to do. I'm scared I'm going to lose Sophie. I don't want my child to die. Like, I don't want her to die. I'm not ready for her to die. And because that was something that they had kept saying, like, Sophie may never come back from this. And so he said, honey, I want you to visualize yourself at Sophia's funeral. I want you to visualize yourself there. I want you to see her coffin. I want you to see yourself speaking at the funeral. And of course, this whole time I'm sobbing. I'm like, I can't do that, Siri. You can't ask me to do that. And he said, you have to, because what you need to see is Jesus on the other side, encouraging you and letting you know that it's, you're not going to go through that alone. Even if that is what's going to happen, you're not going to go through it alone. And you have to see God's faithfulness and God's goodness, even in the hardest, darkest part of what could happen. And so I had to visualize that. I had to put myself there. And did I still believe that God was faithful? 100%. He'd proven himself over and over. Did I still believe that God could work a miracle? Absolutely. He's the same God as he was yesterday, as he is today. Do I believe that Sophie could miraculously be healed. Yes, because he still performs miracles today, and healing is for today. It's not something of the past. It happens today. And in that moment, he said, can you still see Jesus and his faithfulness at the end of this? And I said, yes, I can. And I believe that God's going to work all things for the good. And he said, okay. And so once I released that fear, once I just let it go, I trusted that God was going to get us through. And we ended up having the surgery. And one of the things that the doctor said right before we were in pre-op, I remember the doctor said, she's not going to remember this conversation. She's not going to remember anything that you're talking to her about right now. She may not even remember who you are when she wakes up from surgery. He said, these are the things that are going to happen. And our doctor was
if awesome. It comes back. They said, if that memory comes back,
yes,
it'll be probably days, weeks, or months, and it'll be very distorted.
Her recovery is going to be very difficult. These are all the things that they have to tell you.
She's probably not going to know how to speak
for some time. Yeah. These are all the things that they told us just to prepare us, And our doctors were phenomenal. I absolutely loved our doctors. Her story is actually, it's been published
at the
Med Center. And I've actually had people reach out to me, just to share her story. The point of that is...
kids are going through similar stuff. They're looking for hope.
So when she woke up from the surgery... So right before the surgery, we had been talking about what she was going to eat after surgery. And she said that she wanted sushi. And so they came in, they gave her the sedative to get her calmed down, to get her ready for surgery. And I said, okay, she's not going to remember. As soon as that child woke up, I said, hey, Soph, do you know who I am? And she was like, Mom, where's my sushi? I mean, the nurses that were there, they called several other nurses, and they even called the doctor that was on the floor, and they said, hey, come here. We just had people that were flooding the room, and they were like, this doesn't happen at this kind of surgery. This doesn't happen. And I said, well, I know that God's for me, and that's all I can explain. It's just things like that. She hasn't had a seizure in 2 years, coming up on 3 soon. She did go to Colorado in August, and she had like a little bit of because of elevation change. They think that it triggered, something, but she's been really good since. So something you can be praying about is just for her to not have fear of it happening again, because she does struggle with that. So.
But the point of that being on the communication side is what the enemy was trying to use to tear us apart and has torn people apart and friends apart, is going into that. Had that gone south or gone that sideways, it's really easy to blame each other, blame me. And I told her, I said, whatever happens is on me, and I will carry that, and none of this is on you. Before we went in, but clearing that air and then having us both focused on the Lord because we were following Him. Mm-hmm. It opened up another level of intimacy in our communication, of being able to share those inner fears and worries and trust. And it built a whole nother level of trust inside because we never held it against each other, no matter what happened.
No, because it was a decision that we made.
We made it, and we were going to walk through it. But I said, it's on me what happens.
Yeah.
And so we're going to wrap this one up here where we're at. And we'll have some more topics coming up.
Some really, really good topics. I'm really excited.
But we want to start with communication because I'm butting in more because she told me I had to butt in more or she'll just keep talking.
He's doing so much better. He's more animated today.
I'm coachable, I guess. But the topics, all of them, there's a basis for any struggle that you're going to try to get over in your marriage because it's two of you. And you're never fighting your spouse, you're fighting the lies, even if it's manifesting through them. The basis for all of it's going to come back to knowing the word and being able to communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. And so there's tons of stuff out there on the Bible and reading, and we'll keep pointing to scripture, but I wanted to cover communication first because we don't want to assume that we have a solid foundation on communicating and communication before we get into these other topics.
Cool. All right. So that was our communication episode. If you please like and subscribe and tell your friends that we have a marriage podcast. Starting next week, we're going to have some more people. So you're either going to hear someone talking and sharing their testimony or sharing their struggle, or you're going to see some couples that are going to be here. So it's going to be really, really good. The topics are incredible, and these are topics that they reached out.
That's people that put in the comments or messaged us about what they wanted to cover. So please keep doing that.
Yeah.
Because what we want to do is make sure we're addressing concerns that people are having, or that they currently have. And we do it in person. We also want to do it through this forum so we can help reach more people that have the same questions.
All right. Love you guys.
Have a good night.
What's it called? Loving Kindness, Covenant Loyalty. This is the Chesed Marriage Podcast with Megan and Michael Spear. We'll see you later.